All right, we now welcome on a very special guest from the 1983 NC State title-winning team, Thurl Bailey. He's also the host of the great podcast, Thurl Talk. Also does pregame and postgame analysis for the Utah Jazz. Thurl, how we doing?
I'm doing good, man, and thanks for the introduction. But I need to ask, what year were you born?
I was born in 2000.
See, you weren't even around. You know, you, you weren't even around when we became champions. But here's the nice thing: is that that '83 championship continues to live on, and so I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, especially because of your former teammate Wittenberg coming out with that Survive and Advance documentary.
Yeah, that was a great. It was a great documentary of the actual journey itself, and as a story of really what Coach Valvano meant to not just us, but a lot of people across the world.
So speaking of Derek Wittenberg, we actually interviewed him earlier this week, and I asked him, is there anything I should ask Thurl Bailey? And he said, ask Thurl when DeMatha High School played y'all in high school, and what was the score?
I don't know what the score was, but they beat us by about 60 points. And, Derek and Sydney at the time were great high school players, and DeMatha was probably number one team in the nation. Mm-hmm. But what that game did for us, it gave us a gauge of how much we needed to work. And me personally, for me to get to the next level, it gave me a sense of the work I had to put in. And little did I know then that two guys on that team, Derek Wittenberg and Sidney Lowe, would be my teammates at NC State.
Yeah, so what made you choose NC State? Were there other schools you were considering?
Yeah, I wasn't highly recruited because I was kind of a late bloomer. I didn't really get my start in basketball till late in junior high school. And it really came into my own in probably my senior year. So there were only a handful of schools like North Carolina, NC State. The local schools were recruiting me, Georgetown, Maryland. Mm-hmm. And so when it came down to it, it was basically whether I wanted to stay close to home or go away from home, but not be too far where my parents couldn't come watch me play. So both my parents were from North Carolina, which kind of put me at ease because I had relatives there. North Carolina was recruiting me pretty hard until they signed a guy named James Worthy, who played my position. And so after they signed him, they stopped recruiting me. And it basically came down to a guy named Norm Sloan, who recruited me for NC State. And the rest is sort of history.
When Norm Sloan leaves, did you want to transfer?
I did. Yeah, I did, because when you're recruited, especially at that time, the head coach comes to your home and he sells the program, sells himself. And whatever school that ends up being, your parents are basically handing you over to that coach as your guardian. So you put a lot of trust in that coach to be a father figure as well. And after my freshman year, when Coach Sloan decided to take another job, I didn't really understand the business of college basketball. And obviously he was free to go make more money at University of Florida. But I was devastated. I was going to leave. I called my mom and said, "Mom, Coach Sloan's gone. I'm coming home." And she basically said, "Son, you might be going somewhere, but you're definitely not coming home. You're going to get your education." Education was paramount, and it was the primary reason why I got the scholarship to get a free education to her. And so she told me to be patient and wait, see who they hired. And so I agreed to do that. And in comes this confident Italian guy to meet with the team.
So it kind of rolls into my next question. What was your first impression of Coach Valvano?
My first impression of Coach V was really no impression at all, because I didn't really know of him. There was no Google back then. I couldn't look him up and see what his history and his past was. I knew he had coached at a small college in my mind, Iona College, and NC State obviously saw something in him, and he came to a group of young men that he hadn't recruited. So in my mind, and probably in most of the other guys' minds, We didn't know this guy. We didn't trust him. And that's a big part of it, because you have to develop trust if you're playing a team sport like basketball, and you're being led by a guy who comes in and tells you right off the bat that he knows he's going to win a national championship. I mean, that statement right there was a shock for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it hit us in a way that shows, is this guy that arrogant, or does he really believe that?
Yeah.
But the more he spoke, the more he sold it. And he basically said, if you guys stay with me and trust me, we're going to win that championship. We're going to win it soon. And he was true to his word.
Yeah,
it took us a couple of years.
So give me your best Jimmy V story.
My best Jimmy V story. There are a lot of great stories. My best one is probably the most heartbreaking one.
Mm-hmm.
And, of all the things that we went through with him, of all the difficult times in that journey, of all the development that he created. Well, let's start with the good one, the cutting down the nets practice that I was shocked the first time he introduced that to us. Instead of practicing, he wanted us to really put ourselves in the moment. Mm-hmm. And to visualize what it would be like to win a national championship. What would we do? How would we act? Go through the ceremonial. He had the scissors, so we climbed the ladder and we cut down the nets like we had won the national championship. And it was so awkward to do that because we had no real reference, but we could visualize what we would do and what that would feel like. And that's what he was trying to teach us, is that you've got to be a little uncomfortable if you want to get to that next level. You can't stay status quo. You've got to get outside yourself and do things that most people weren't doing back then. Imagine what it would be like. And so that turned out to be a great learning experience for all of us. It was unusual as it was. Mm-hmm. When we got to the championship and got to the ceremony, we felt like, we knew what to do. Like we had been there. We had imagined it the whole time. The other one was when we discovered V had cancer. And it was really the first time he came out in public. We had our reunion, our 10-year reunion at NC State. And he walked down before he went out to make a speech, he walked by the bench where we were standing and gave all of us a hug and got to me and climbed up on a chair and just put his arms around me and told me he loved me, thanked me for my hard work. And so it was that part of the story for me was just so important. That was the last time I saw V, and I knew it would be. And so, there's a lot of things that happened in between those times, some great and fun stories, but my most memorable ones are the ones that stick out for me are the things that he taught that were different than anyone else teaching at that time. And the things he taught after the fact when he was going through his own battle. I just felt like that man could accomplish anything. Just like that first speech he gave us about winning a national championship, I knew that if anybody could beat cancer, it would be V. And I look at the things that his foundation's doing now, the Jimmy V Foundation, and his legacy is strong as ever.
So transitioning back a little bit on that '83 title run, so you beat Georgia, you're in New Mexico at the Final Four, and you watch Louisville, Houston. Watching that game, how nervous are y'all?
Well, I'm not sure nervous is the word, because you don't get there by being nervous, right?
Yeah, you beat Ralph Sampson to get there, so.
Yeah, so I think as an athlete, especially in our position, we weren't nervous. We knew we were good. Mm-hmm. We weren't boasting about it. There was a way to approach it. individually and collectively as a team. So we earned it, right? We earned the right to be there just like any other team, Louisville, Houston, whoever. Now, if your other team's looking at us, you're probably not thinking that way. You're probably thinking, well, this team's, they've been lucky. Their journey's probably about to end. Look how good we are. And you watch that Louisville-Houston game, and it was just a dunk fest. I mean, it was just, you could tell there were a lot of future NBA players going to come off both of those teams. And, of course, with Houston, with two Hall of Famers and Olajuwon and Drexler. But it wasn't nerves. It was, we were in awe. We were in awe, one, of the type of talent and the type of game that was being played before our eyes. But it also gave us a perspective of, we're going to play one of these teams. And this is what we can come to expect. Now, how do we approach this knowing that, we feel like we've got just as good a chance as anybody? And so I think that was on our side. Because if anybody watched those two teams play, they probably picked their national champion from that game.
Yeah.
So that took the focus off of NC State, right? The Cinderella team. They're about to wake up. The dream's about to be over. Not in our eyes.
So after that game, you win the game. What's that feeling like, winning a national title?
Indescribable, but describable in the sense that in my visualization of what I thought that would be like, it was that and much more. You knew that the fans were going to be into it, and normally when you win a game like that, your fans will rush the floor, and that did happen. So as far as the ceremonial part, that was pretty predictable. But on a personal feeling, it's not even real until much later, because you're still caught in the moment.
Yeah.
I dropped to my knees, right? Somebody came and helped me up. And so you're still caught in that moment that you're the best team in college basketball and you just won a national championship. And not only did you win it, it's the way you won. And I think that's probably the biggest story.
Yeah,
it was the journey. It wasn't necessarily the final game. So maybe a day or so later, when it sinks in, not just to us as players, but to everybody who bet against us, right? And for the folks who believed in us, and the stories along the way, the things that taught people, and we got letters from people that were just incredible. I had really had no experience in understanding how much bigger that whole thing was than basketball. When there's a lady with her husband's in a coma and she puts the games on for him because he's a basketball fan and hopes that, the journey that she's been following gives her the hope that her husband can make it. And those are things that you don't even fathom as a young college player, but that's really what our journey and our story created.
Would you trade that title for an NBA title?
No.
Yeah.
No, I would not. I would not. And not that the NBA title wouldn't be as important. I mean, if you're at that level, that's your goal. You want to win an NBA championship. But listen, you've got some of the best athletes in the world playing at that level, right? That are making really, really good money. And especially at that time, college basketball, really unadulterated, and wasn't big business. It was more, these kids that come from different backgrounds, and that's what really my book focuses on. Are the stories of individuals who have gone through their journeys, and at some point we all came together. And when I wrote this book and interviewed my teammates, I found out some things that I never knew about them. And so I'm looking at their personal journeys and how they came to be my teammates, and then we created this great story. But I would not trade that experience, because that NBA championship, they happen every year. and a lot of times they're predictable, right?
Mm-hmm.
You paid for the best players.
Yep.
You got three superstars on one team. You got LeBron and Anthony Davis, and they're going to be good. But what NC State accomplished, I don't know if anyone would have written that story, would have seen that coming. I mean, you can't really write a better story than that with that kind of ending.
So going back to 80s basketball, you hear guys like Roy Williams, Dick Vitale, and even my dad claim that college basketball in the 80s was at its absolute peak. Do you agree with that?
From the perspective that I see it now, yes, I do believe it. I believe it because the game has evolved.
Yeah.
Right. It's still basketball, but it's evolved into.
Do you like how it's evolved to all these 3-pointers and spreading the floor and all that?
I don't dislike it. I don't try to claim that it's better or worse. I know it's different, and like everything else, you embrace it. I do think the pro game, the NBA game, is more favorable to the offensive player now. Yeah. Because you could get away with a lot more physicality when I was coming up through the ranks, and obviously 3 is more than 2, so that's what players are working on right now, developing the 3-point shot, and everybody needs to learn it. Stretch 4s, stretch 5s. Now we didn't really have those back then. We had guys who could shoot it, but they had particular roles and positions. So, I think. Because even back then, you developed rivalries, even sometimes from high school, but really from college, you developed personal rivalries with players like James Worthy and Sam Perkins and Ralph. We stayed at least 3 years and enjoyed our college experience, where guys now are going to college that play basketball. They're just going to college to get to the NBA. Right after 1 year, if they're that talent level. So that changes the game a little bit, because now it's a business, and there's obviously money involved that helps them make that decision. And not that it's a bad decision for everybody, but it is the way it is now. So I definitely think that in the 80s was the pinnacle and the peak of some great college basketball.
So when you got drafted by Utah, were you excited to go to Utah, or because most people aren't too thrilled to go to Salt Lake City, especially back in the 80s?
Well, you know what? I don't know. You're probably right. I don't know if there was some kind of a census or poll or something, but hey, I was just excited to be drafted by anybody. My excitement came because I made it to that next level. And I was good enough, especially after the journey I went through after being cut twice in junior high school and really coming on my junior, senior year in high school. That's not a lot of time to be developed and get to the next level. But, winning a national championship helps. And so, I didn't know much about Utah. I was a really good student, and I knew geography really well. I knew where it was. And we came through here, obviously, to play in the regionals. And, but I loved it. I loved it when I first came out. It was a picturesque state. Culturally, there were some things that I wasn't used to, and heck, they weren't used to me either. Like any place you go to. But it's all about people. It's all about how people treat you, how they welcome you as a community and as a city and as a state. And I've been here over 30 years now. So that just tells you right there how much I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. So what do most fans not understand about NBA daily life?
What they don't understand, if I'm bringing them up to speed, because it was different in my day.
Yeah.
A lot of the travel is going to happen, but back then it was commercial travel. Right? You had to get up early in the mornings. You had to leave the next day after a game. And that's evolved as well. Every team has their own plane or charters a plane now. I think what they don't understand is it's really not as glamorous as people may think it is, just because there's a lot of money involved and you're flying from city to city. You don't really get a chance to get to know those cities because of a number of games and practices that you have.
Mm-hmm.
But if, like anything, Carter, like anything, to be one of the best, there's only a certain amount of jobs available in the NBA every year. It's only 30 teams, and you think 30 teams, and each team probably only needs one or two, maybe three players every year. So not a lot of guys who aspire to be NBA players will make it to the NBA. There's always other avenues, but I think the biggest thing is that it just takes a lot of hard work to get to that level, and you don't even have to be like the greatest shooter. You have to have something special about you, whether it's being a great rebounder, showing great leadership, being a great shooter, being a defender, something. If you're good at those things, somebody will see that. You'll be found by it. It doesn't matter where you are. That greatness will come through, and people will hear about you. But yeah, I think if that's one thing, it's just not as glamorous of a life, but it is a good life if you treat yourself well and you take care of your money and understand. If you learn, if you're a student of the game and not just go out and play just for the pay, but understand and how you can, that it's short-lived, right? I mean, I played 12 years in the NBA, 16 years total, and it went by that fast. So what I try to do is prepare for life after basketball before that basketball ended, by taking care of my money, by making sure that, the people around me that I trusted, and just by making sure that my family that was my family, my wife and kids, were well taken care of as well.
So this is going to be a loaded question. One, what I want to hear your best Frank Layden story, but also, what impact did he have on your life?
It's a great question. It was Frank Layden's decision, along with the Jazz team, to draft me.
Mm-hmm. And
at that time, the Jazz weren't playing very well. They hadn't made the playoffs. They came over from New Orleans 6 or 7 years before that year. But when I got to Utah and met Frank, I knew right away that he was a player's coach. He loved basketball and he was great at coaching, but it wasn't everything to him. Mm-hmm. What I loved about him most was when he gave gifts, he gave books. And he picked those books based on what he thought we would like to read and our personalities. And he was so good at that. He was so good at really knowing the other part of us. Even if we were NBA players, we weren't, we were human beings, and he wanted us to not just be seen as just basketball players. But he was the funniest man, I think, other than Jim Valvano, that I'd ever met. And I didn't really believe that at that level. I thought that all the coaches were serious, and you had your job and you did your job. But Coach Layden really taught all of us that, this is not the end all be all for you. This is, when you win or lose a game and you get in the bus and you ride through underprivileged neighborhoods and you see all these homeless people, he made us realize that we have a platform that we can use to make other people's lives better and happier. Even if it wasn't about money, it was about finding that part of ourselves. So I have lunch with Frank probably once or twice a month, along with some of my other friends like Mark Eaton and some of the other guys that are still around. But Frank's a great man, great man, and I love him dearly.
So when John Stockton comes in, how fun is it to play with someone that's so unselfish like that?
Well, I'm hoping it was fun for him to play with me first, because I was here first. Stockton came in a year after I did, and when he was drafted, nobody knew what a Gonzaga was, so they didn't really know why the Jazz had drafted him, but obviously the Jazz saw something in him. I took him under my wing when he got here. He didn't think he'd be here for long, so he saved all of his money. He wouldn't turn his heat on in the wintertime because he didn't want to pay a big heating bill because he just figured he better save as much as he could. But he learned from guys like Ricky Green, and you could start to see this potential star coming through, and just not fancy, but getting it done. And it was so much fun to play with a guy who knew you so well, probably knew you sometimes better than you knew you, right? I mean, I got the ball in my hands. I didn't think I was open, but John saw me. So just honored to play with a guy like him. And then the next year, Karl Malone comes in, and that duo, one of the best ever to play the game.
Was that difficult when he comes in because you have to come off the bench, right?
Yeah, I didn't have to. I chose to.
Oh, okay.
Coach Layden came to me at a certain point and said, "Listen, we need some help off the bench, right? We need you to play a supporting role. We need you to embrace this role." And I think the mindset of most people, even me, maybe to a certain extent, thought that the best players are the first five on the court. And that's a misconception. Really is. There's a lot of great players, but there are certain roles that need to be played for a team to be successful. And my book, Team of Destiny, deals with this as well. It's because I interviewed, one of the best interviews I had was a guy named Tommy DiNardo that played on my NC State team. Tommy was a walk-on. First of all, to make a team as a walk-on is difficult within itself. He makes the team and he really never sees a minute in a game. Never really plays. But his role, he played it well. He was one of the best practice players ever. He made me better. He made other guys better. So when Frank comes to me, and after he had gone to some other guys who said no, they wouldn't do it, came to me and asked me if I would mind coming off the bench. I said, "Coach, whatever you need." And so that was my role. I embraced it. And I actually thought I had an advantage because I had a chance to sit there for 5-6 minutes and watch the game materialize to see what I could do to change it. So I always thought that gave me an advantage because I'm watching the guy I'm going to be guarding. What is he doing that I can change? Is he playing D? Is he going right, left? And so I didn't mind it at all. And that was really how I spent my career. And Frank just made it clear that, listen, it's not about starting and who starts, it's about who finishes, right? Because I was in the game at crunch time.
Yeah.
I was in the close game. So that meant a lot to me to have that role and to embrace it and help the team win.
What's your best John Stockton story?
I don't know if there's a story as far as any particular thing that happened. John was just a consummate teammate. And we had some great moments, still do, still talk to each other and still have that lifelong friendship. But John was a gym rat.
Yeah, how good was this team's conditioning?
Oh, it was great. Especially, and your conditioning really happens before the season. It's off season. It's how you come prepared for training camp. It's not using training camp to get in shape and get prepared. And that's what was always impressive, that Karl and John and myself led that charge, and other guys knew that when they came into camp, they'd better be in shape and ready to play. But probably the funniest story is when I would go and pick John up, for practices and stuff when he first got here as a rookie, and going into his cupboard and seeing all he had was there was some pancake mix called Krusties, and that's all he had up there. That's all he ate, and he did that because it was very affordable, and he didn't have to spend a lot of money, and it was freezing in there because again he didn't know how long he was going to be in Utah, so he was trying to save every single penny. I said, "John, come on, man, turn some heat on," and he wouldn't do it. Till he signed that $1 million contract, and he figured he'd be around for a while. But he was just like that, very efficient guy. I would go to Spokane to do his camps in the summertime with he and his family, and if you got to know John, man, one of the greatest friends, greatest guys you'd ever want to be associated with.
So when you get traded to Minnesota, were you disappointed?
Of course,
Mm-hmm.
of course, yeah. Because being traded, you don't choose to be traded,
Yeah.
unless you go to the team and say I want out. But this was
that Jerry
a
Jones decision?
It wasn't Jerry's decision ultimately. I think
Mm-hmm.
it was whoever the GM was at the time, and the owner. You know, it was a collective decision.
Mm-hmm.
But it was more than that, Carl. It was a business decision,
Mm-hmm.
and those aren't always bad. It's the team has to make the best decision for the team, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for the player, because one, you're worth something, right? You're worth the trade. They have to give you something for the player you're trading, whether it's money or a couple other players. So I had that value, and I think the Jazz were at a point where they needed to move to the next level, and they figured that to do that, they needed maybe youth. They needed, a different position, if you will. So that's when the Jazz traded me to Minnesota for Tyrone Corbin.
Was it weird being coached by Sidney Lowe?
It was weird. It was different being coached by your college teammate.
Mm-hmm.
It was different in a way, good in a way, and not so good in another way, because he was your leader. Not that he wasn't sort of a leader when I played with him in college, but now he's controlling your minutes in a game based on him trying to win games. So it was a little different for me, but we made it work, and we still have our friendship today. But yeah, it was different because you're going from a winning Utah team to a team in Minnesota that barely wins 20 games a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a different perspective, different for me to kind of get used to that, because you never want to get used to losing.
Mm-hmm.
But it taught me a lot about myself, and humbled me a bit, and made me work harder. And in my career, I had an opportunity to come back to Utah after a stint overseas, and in my career in the place I started.
So, who's the best player you ever had to guard at your position, and why?
Larry Bird, because Larry wasn't an athletic player. He wasn't going to jump out of the gym, get up in the air and make some crazy moves, but his basketball IQ was off the charts.
Mm-hmm.
He knew how to play the game. He knew where to be. He knew where to put himself on the court and a rebound. He could handle the ball at that time at 6'9", like a guard. He could play as well left-handed as right-handed. He was just an amazing player that didn't look like he was working hard. And when you look at the stat sheet at the end of the game, he's got 40, 50 points and 12 rebounds and 11, 12 assists. It's like, wow, when did that happen? But those kind of players, the Dr. J's, the Larry Birds, the Magic Johnsons, when you played against them, you had to bring your best, and they taught you something. They taught you where you needed to be as far as your work ethic. And so that's what made me a player of longevity, and a player that was able to be an impact player by watching some of those guys and studying them, and trying to emulate some of the things that they did.
Would Larry Bird translate to today's game?
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course. Because when you have an IQ like he had, and you can shoot, you can dribble, it's easy for you to make adjustments. I think he would be a better player today.
Mm-hmm.
Shooting a three with that size, being able to handle the ball. He was really one of the first small forwards that played like a guard and rebounded and did all the things. So yeah, I think players like that would love to play in this era where they could. I mean, he would average, almost 30 points a game, I believe, and be a triple-double guy.
Mm-hmm. So after basketball ends for you, a lot of people, don't know what to do with themselves after basketball. Were you more excited to be done with basketball? Were you burned out?
I wasn't burned out. I
Mm-hmm.
was prepared.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of guys who don't plan ahead, who don't say, where do I see myself 4 or 5 years from now? Where do I see myself if I can't play basketball tomorrow? What have I
Mm-hmm.
done? How have I prepared for it? I know you have to go into it knowing you can't play forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you also have to go into it knowing that a lot of times the more money you make, the more you spend. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're smart enough, you start to prepare for your next life, your next career, and hopefully, even though you make a lot of money, doesn't mean you should just rest on your laurels and live on a beach forever. There's other things I've always wanted to do, and so and in planning for those things, um, you segue into that next career. And it's not easy. It's not easy to cut that cord. It's something you love to do for years. It wasn't easy for me, even though I knew what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because you want to play, play, play. This is all you've known for a while. And now, you know, you stop playing and you wake up one morning and you're in your wife's way. And she's like, don't you have something to do today? And so that's kind of how I segued into broadcasting. That's what I studied in college. And now it's a different perspective in front of a camera now,
Mm-hmm.
way to communicate with people. I know the game. I played it for years. Now I have to be able to talk about it in a way that people can understand what's going on and why it's going on in the game. And so, yeah, it wasn't a shock. It wasn't. I was prepared, even though it wasn't easy. I was prepared.
Mm-hmm. So before you go, my last question, it's actually from my uncle Chris Bond. Obviously, you're huge into music. He wants to know what was your favorite music group when you were a teenager and why? And also, what is your favorite group to this day?
My favorite group when I was a teenager, probably my late teens, was Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved. I mean, it was probably, I don't know, 15 people in a musical group, and I think the reason I liked them so much was that Maurice White, who was the head of that group, was his perspective on music was amazing. All of his music had a message, whether it was the message of bringing people together. If you go back and listen to Earth, Wind, and Fire's music, there's some love stuff songs in there, and a lot of it's about loving each other. But there's some songs with a lot more, deeper meaning that are that draw the listener to you to to the music and kind of open your mind up to what are you doing to make things better in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So they're probably my most favorite group ever. Although I have a lot of, uh, I'm all over the place when it comes to genres. Even now, I listen to a lot of today's country music. The lyrics speak to me. That's why I love listening to it. My favorite artist, musician, my singer probably of all time. Um, wow, there's a lot there, but I'd have to say it's probably now Prince was a musical genius.
Mm-hmm.
So was Michael Jackson. So all those musicians were affected my life in a great way. But it's hard to pick one. It
Mm-hmm.
really is hard to pick one artist. But I'd say Earth, Wind, and Fire was music I grew up on and that I knew. Lionel Richie was also another one.
So, Thurl, thank you so much for your time. I could have done this all day. I hope once all this COVID stuff's over, we can do this in person. Go check out his podcast, The Thurl Talk, and you'll see him on pregame and postgame for the Utah Jazz. Thurl, thank you so much.
Hey, I appreciate it. Also, my book is available at thurlbailey.com for anybody who wants to check out excerpts and order the book as well. I think you'll enjoy that journey as well. Thanks, Carter. Thanks for all you do, buddy.
Go check that out. Go buy it right now. All right. Take care, Thurl.
See you, buddy.